Hello, I'm Jason Connolly, CEO of JMC Legal Recruitment, and I've been asked by the Law Society Gazette to record this podcast today on how to sell yourself as a candidate. Now, I can appreciate it's not always easy to know how to sell yourself, especially when you might be working day in, day out in a particular role, and it's a bit like a rabbit in headlight scenario. Sometimes you need to take a step back, actually take that time away to give yourself the thinking process in terms of how to sell yourself. What I often say to candidates that I work with or people I've advised over the years is you should take at least some time once every 6 months to take a step back and to look at all things about your career. So how I would tend to work this would be I would take a step back and think about, first of all, your 5 to 10 year career plan, where it is you want to be in, say, 5 or 10 years' time. Once you've kind of got that down on paper, what you want to do is work backwards. What do I mean by that? So let's say I'm a residential property solicitor and where I want to be is an equity partner in 10 years' time. Let's go big, let's go ambitious. So that's where I want to be. What I would then do is I would work backwards from there in terms of what milestones do I have to reach in order to get to that place. So it might be, right, what I need to do working backwards is I need to make it to a salaried partner by, let's say, year 8. Then backwards from there again, I need to make it as a senior associate. I need to make it as an associate and so on. So you see what we're doing. We're thinking about where the aim is and where you want to be. Then we're going to plan backwards. Because I think before we even get to the subject of how to sell yourself as a candidate, let's talk about where it is you want to be and where it is that you want to go. Because I think that's important. And once you've done this exercise and you've given thought to that, I think it's important that you do that before you go onto the market selling yourself for an opportunity. Because yes, you might go out there and look at your next role, but I think what you need to ask yourself is, does the next role align with where you want to be? Because legal is an unforgiving sector, in my opinion. And I think a lot of the time, candidates might pick a role and just supposing that you move on or you stay there 2 years, what purpose does that next role serve to your overall career plan? Because if you're just moving for an extra few thousand on top of your paycheck a year, or the move is solely, you're thinking at this stage, money motivated, you need to sometimes think deeper than that. Is money just enough? Where is it you want to go? Where is it you want to be? And how is it I'm going to get there? So once you've got that kind of 10-year plan down with different milestones, then it should provide clarity to you on it, does this next role align with where I want to be? Let's say you're in the regions at the moment and you want to be an equity partner in London. That's the absolute aim at this stage. You're thinking big, you're thinking ambitiously. Well, does this next role that you're picking, which might be moving sideways to another regional firm on a slight bit more money, does that pivot you towards where you want to be in the future? If it doesn't, then maybe you need to think about, is this the right role for you? Is this the role that's going to allow you to make that pathway towards where you want to be? Because to give yourself that thinking time is wonderful, and it's being kind to yourself and it's being kind to your career. So just to go backwards, if you were thinking about where's this next role and how is that going to align, it might be that a smarter move is to move to a firm in London that's a slight more boutique specialist firm, because what you've then done then is you've moved into London, you're already in that setting. Perhaps as part of the qualification process and the questions you ask in the interview process, you could be asking about what progression is on offer, where could you go if you're an achiever, asking about other success stories in the firm and what is it that other people have achieved, doing your due diligence. And then if you do move into that role, what you need to think about and what you can talk to your recruiter about is, does that next role in central London, what opportunities would be available to me in 2 years' time if I come onto the market with these credentials? Then what you should be able to do is see, well, how does that next role get you to where you want to be overall? I hope that makes sense. I've tried to explain it in the easiest way, but it all comes down to every 6 months minimum, sit down and give yourself a career MOT, so to speak. Because by taking yourself out of the situation, standing backwards, and perhaps even talking to someone about it, it can provide clarity. It might be that you speak to someone who's a senior solicitor, or what I think is great is I think everyone in life should have a mentor. I think mentors are fantastic, someone that you can bounce ideas off, someone who's perhaps been there, done that, worn the t-shirt, who can give you some of their career wisdom is always a great thing. But, I'd always say to candidates as well, if you're considering a career move, come to JMC. We more than happily will give you that advice and talk to you about how that role is going to help and how it's going to align. And we can give you that time to stand back and look at your career overall. So that's just a bit, first of all, about your career plan, how it is that you should be planning. And, every 3-6 months, take yourself out the equation, look at where you're going, stand back, look at your billings, look at all things about yourself, because by doing that, you're going to be kind to yourself. So next of all, I wanted to talk about selling yourself. Now, I think in the common day, it takes more than just to be good at your job to stand out. What do I mean by that? I mean, what is your personal brand? I think everybody should have a personal brand. It's your shop front. And the more you build your personal brand over a period of time, the more work will come and find you. Now, it might seem a bit puzzling to some people. Well, what is a personal brand? How do I get a personal brand? I've been highly successful throughout my career building a personal brand as a recruiter. Is it all about LinkedIn? No, it's not all about LinkedIn. It can be about using many different platforms. And your personal brand is something that you're going to forever be building, forever evolving, but it does take time to do. So it could even be simple things, just by doing business development on the phone, asking clients, do they know anyone else, telling them more about the services that you offer, and selling yourself. I think I done an interesting podcast a few weeks ago with Sarah Goulbourne, who's the founder of Gunnar Cook Solicitors, and we were talking about selling yourself. And the world we live in now, it takes for you to be more than just a lawyer for you to get work. The role of a lawyer is changing, and it's really important that you can sell yourself, and building a personal brand is really going to help you. So one of the most obvious platforms that people use is LinkedIn. Now, I know better than anyone, if LinkedIn is used correctly, the power of it is absolutely incredible, and you can get your name out there to so many people. So let's just say that you put a LinkedIn post out, something that was great content, something that's going to resonate with people and make them want to click on it. So if you had, let's say, a post that went out and it got 30 likes, if each one of those connections have 2,000 followers, which most people on average tend to have around that number, we found, that post would go out to 60,000 people. That's 60,000 pairs of eyes that you'll have looking at that post. So how LinkedIn works, to someone that doesn't know, is if someone likes or engages with your post on LinkedIn, it goes out to their network and it gets impressions. And we've found at JMC the power of using this as a platform has absolutely been great. But what you need to do with LinkedIn is it's not an overnight success story. It's something you've got to work at all the time. Kind of example is every time you come across someone that you work with, or someone that, not just from an internal viewpoint, someone that client of yours or someone that you want to be linking in with them. You want to get your audience as big as possible. A lot of people, I go to a lot of lawyers' profiles, and we use very sophisticated LinkedIn software in order to do our job. And you'd be absolutely surprised by the amount of lawyers that don't even have their practice area on their profile. It might just say solicitor. A LinkedIn profile that's got no information about you and says that you're just a solicitor is not going to be much use to anybody. You need to sell yourself on LinkedIn. You need to build a profile, and you need to, even have a picture on there. What's the practice area you do? Talk to people about the value it is that you add, not just the sterile profile that says I do residential property, or I do banking law, or whatever. You want to talk about the value that you add to people's matters, people's transactions. What is it that you actually do? And there's loads and loads and loads of material online. I don't think building your LinkedIn profile needs to be something that's overly complicated, but I think what people need to step away from is, and lawyers I do think are terrible at this at times, is just having a roles and responsibilities sheet. What do I mean by a roles and responsibilities sheet? Just having a list of things that you do, a list of services that you might offer. You want to get a profile that might say something to the effect of, what I do as a lawyer is I add value to clients' transactions by doing this, that, the other. What is it that you actually do that adds value to clients? A well-drafted profile is worth its weight in gold. So you want to be building LinkedIn every day. The bigger that you can get that, the more your brand is going to be going out there. But one of the things you need to do is make sure that you actually post. Now, the amount of people who have a LinkedIn profile who never go onto the platform and post, you're not engaging with your audience. It could just be simple things like you find an interesting news article and you give your opinion on that and you post that out to your network and you start the conversation. By doing that regularly and making sure that you've got posts out there, you're going to make sure that you're in people's minds. I always say to people that I'm training, could you possibly talk to 4,000 people in a month? Well, no, you wouldn't. You wouldn't have time to speak to that many people. By using LinkedIn, you can still be in their minds. And I think that's really the power of the platform. It's one of those things, though, you need to do it regularly. You need to constantly be on the lookout for stuff that you can put out there. But there's many lawyers, I won't mention names in particular, that I see on my feeds, and they're always posting really interesting comment. They're getting tens, dozens, sometimes hundreds of likes, and all that's going out to a world of potential business, a world of potential new perspectives, and a world of potential new business clients and opportunities. So the power of LinkedIn is incredible. I would say to any lawyer, whether you're training, whether you're an NQ, get out there, get on the platform and try it out. You want to be seen that you are an expert in your market. And by being an expert in your market is actually putting content out, interview pieces, blogs. You don't need to overthink this content. And, it might be that you speak to a business development department in your firm and get their kind of take on social media. A lot of firms have very stringent policies when it comes to social media. Me personally, I think lawyers should be out there utilizing this platform. I think legal has a long way to go compared to that of other industry sectors for people actually being out there. But when you see lawyers do this right, the results it reaps is absolutely amazing. I've actually got a contact of mine who's a lawyer who uses LinkedIn in a really clever way, puts out very engaging posts, things that are actually relevant to the industry. And he's rightly said himself, the amount of business that this brings in for him is one of his busiest kind of business generators, and it makes up a lot of the work that comes in is through that. And I think lastly on LinkedIn, it's one of those things that if you put out videos as well, people will actually start to feel that they know you, even if they don't know you, just by looking at this content. If you do want specific advice in regards to LinkedIn, we could do another podcast on this for sure. It's a massive subject and something I'm very passionate about, having built a brand myself. I know through building my own personal brand that it's presented me with a whole raft of opportunities. I've been on BBC News, Channel 4 News, Bloomberg, and all of these different opportunities manifested themselves off the back of LinkedIn. I think you want to be future thinking as a lawyer. You always want to be thinking as to where your business comes next. Not just next, but in the future, 6 months' time, a year's time. And I think all too often, a lot of the time in business in general, and I know I'm going off on a slight bit of a tangent here, but I think that we always look at the immediate. I think we always look at what work are we going to get in the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next month. You want to be thinking further ahead. And LinkedIn is one of those things that does take time. It isn't an instant winner. It doesn't produce results immediately. It's one of those things which is a bit of the long game, but you always want to be thinking in that way. So next of all, the topic I want to cover is, as a fee earner, considerations on how to sell yourself as a candidate. I think business development is very important in legal now. Like I said in the last section, it's not just enough now to be a strong technical lawyer. You want to be someone that can bring business in. All too often, I've spoken to lawyers that have got to 8-10 years PQE, and they're in a situation where the partner is passing them all the work, or they're a workhorse to a partner. And yes, that might not be an issue to some people. Some people might not want to be going out there and being a rainmaker and whatnot. But I think at a junior level, it's a consideration. If you want to get to partnership in your legal career and you haven't had any experience in business development, you don't have a client base, you've never had huge amounts of opportunity in that kind of business development world, then it's going to have problems. It's going to cause problems. And I've spoken to many lawyers over the years where they get to 7 years PQE. They want to think about partnership. They've not got any business development experience. I'm a big fan of law firms which engage with junior lawyers, their NQs, their trainees, get them to do business development, because bigger your business case, the more business you've got, the more opportunity is going to present itself. If we get a partner come along to us, and we do a lot of work when it comes to partner moves, lateral moves, team moves, always comes down to business. How much business does the lawyer have? What is their net worth? What's their total potential in terms of what do they cross-refer over to other departments and so on? The days, I think, of legal work just flowing through the door kind of long gone. There's a lot more competition on the market. It's a great thing for the consumer, but it does mean that lawyers need to be dynamic. So these are all things to think about when you're thinking about coming onto the market and you're thinking about how you're going to sell yourself as a candidate. What I'm trying to take you away from throughout this podcast is the mindset of just writing a CV, which is a roles and responsibilities document. And lawyers, absolutely terrible sometimes when it comes to selling themselves on a CV. Obviously, I'm speaking very much in general terms, but when it comes to a CV, it needs more than just roles and responsibilities. A CV, at the end of the day, it's a sales document. It is a document to sell you, not a document just to list all your roles and responsibilities. Yes, there's a place for that. Yes, we need to know what you're doing. Yes, we need to understand some of the work you're working on and some of the deals that you've done, but the document is there to sell you. So some other considerations I'd be thinking of as a fee earner, we've just spoken about business development. That's very important when it comes to drafting your CV and even going out there and selling yourself. It all comes down a lot of the time to pounds, pence and shillings. So knowing what your network is worth, maybe get thinking about if you're someone that introduces a lot of work or you're someone that has brought work in, what is that work actually worth? What is it worth? If you're bringing in estate agents, what are those estate agents worth? If you're bringing in, well, we won't go so far as talking about banks. That's slightly more complicated in terms of panels and whatnot. So we'll keep this simple for now. But if you're bringing a estate agency in, what are those clients worth? And what cross-referral work does that have? Do you work go over to private client? What are you actually introducing? Do you know the value of it? Are you someone that's commercially minded? Do you know your facts, numbers, figures? Does your firm even allow you to know this information? Is it transparent? In most firms I find these days it is. If someone didn't know what they bill or they weren't aware of their billings, I would be asking questions. Why? Because that information should be readily available. I don't understand why any law firm now, the sort of common day, wouldn't share that information with their fee earners. The first question would be, if someone didn't know what they were billing, well, how are you actually targeted? Be the first question. If they were targeted by completions rather than billings, then I'd want to understand more about their charging structure. Is it fixed fee? Is it not? And what's the situation there? So on the subject of billings, what do you bill? We need to know that, and that's very important when a candidate comes on the market. When it comes to selling yourself, knowing what you bill, knowing what you pass across to other departments. You might be a senior associate and you might be passing work down, but if you're passing work down, what's that work worth? Because all of this forms your total worth. And what is your total worth? When I talk about total worth, what am I talking about? I'm talking about not just the work that you service. A lot of the time, lawyers will talk to us and they will say that I bill, I don't know, 150,000 a year, let's say. That's fine, but a lot of the time, their total worth is larger than the billings that they bill themselves. Now, I'll give you an example. Senior associate who's overseeing a department working with a partner might bill 150,000. However, they spend 50% of their time managing a team below them. So if they spend 50% of their time managing a team below them, let's say that generates 200,000 of which they bring in, that gives us a figure then of 350,000, including their billings and the billings that they pass down to juniors. That forms their total worth, but it could even be greater than that. They could even be passing work over to other departments, let's say private client, which again forms, what is the total worth? What do you pass across to these other departments? And because a lot of the time candidates, without realizing it, can undersell themselves. They will undersell themselves because what they will do is they will talk about their billings the whole time. They might talk about managing a team, but they won't talk about the financials associated with stuff. It might even be that you deal with the firm's compliance. You are the person that reports and does the compliance, or you're involved with Lexel. All of these other things that you do, they're taking you away from fee earning. And it's very important that when you start to sell yourself, you break down your time, you know what you're doing, because let's say, for instance, if you only spend half your time fee earning and the other half of the time doing compliance or managing or whatever it may be, that figure is going to look very low, that fee earning figure. And it's very important that you make sure that whoever it is that's dealing with you understands that figure is only of you doing 50% of the fee earning time. So what would your total potential be worth in another firm? Well, it'd be worth 300,000 because you would double that figure based on 100% of the fee earning time. I hope I'm making sense in this episode. But, it's important. It's important how you spread your time, especially if you're being sent over for a fee earner role. And if you don't spend 100% of your time fee earning at the moment, what's really important is that someone is aware of that. People are aware that you have these other considerations. And it could be that when, people actually work out what your total worth is in terms of passing work across, passing work down, doing the compliance, doing the managing, leading a team, it looks great. But a lot of the time, lawyers don't necessarily take themselves back out of that situation at the time to actually give themselves that thinking time to think, okay, let's break down my time. Let's see what my time is worth. Let's see, once I factor in all these other bits and pieces, what is it that I'm actually billing versus time spent. Another thing to consider is capacity. If you're a fee earner that's billing 150,000, but you're only working at 60% capacity because the department's quiet, first question is, well, what have you done to try and make yourself 100% busy? If it was a case where, you're a junior lawyer, the department's quiet, then we need to know that you're only billing 60% capacity, because it's going to make that number look smaller than what your total potential is. So there's a lot of points here, a lot of considerations. What we've talked about is business development. Lawyers at a junior level need to sell themselves. Work no longer comes through the door. Making sure that you build that personal brand. Billings, what do you do? What do you pass across? What's your total worth? Lots of points here. And what puts you ahead of the competition is another point as well. We'll talk about that in just one moment. What do you pass across? And what we'll also talk about in this section, what do you do to stand out apart from the crowd, and advice to NQs. Now, what puts you ahead of the competition? It could be that you're someone that you might be 3 years PQE. You've got a lot of paralegal experience from years ago. What is it that's going to put you ahead of everyone else for the job that you're applying for? And this is where it comes down to selling yourself as a candidate, understanding what it is that puts you ahead. So we'll talk in this section about the CV. A CV is a sales document, not just meant to be a document that's a roles and responsibilities sheet, as we talked about earlier. When you do a CV, I think a common mistake a lot of the time is these CVs tend to get very big, very wordy, lots of narrative. A CV should be very, very easy to read. It should have at the top your key achievements. What is it that you've achieved? What is it that stands you out from other candidates? If you've dealt with an absolutely fantastic corporate transaction that's really complex, that's involved different jurisdictions and so on, let's mention it. Let's get it up the top. Top of the CV is where you want your key achievements. It might be underneath every role that you've had, first 4 bullet points, key achievements. It's a common misconception that people will spend a long time reading a CV. A hiring manager won't. There was a statistic done, and I can't remember where it was published, so forgive me, but a hiring manager only spends initially 45 seconds looking at a CV. As recruiters, we're different. We spend more time looking at CVs, and we will sometimes try to pick them apart and actually find the selling points which might be hidden in a part of the CV. They shouldn't be hidden. They should be out there at the top. What are the key achievements? I'm a big fan personally of bullet points. Make sure it's concise. The CV. You want to make sure it's easy to read, it flows well, and avoid any formatting. We see a lot of tables and a lot of really lovely things, but keep it simple. Keep it simple. When it comes to tailoring your CV, I'm a big fan of tailoring your CV around the job. I think that when you're applying for a job, if you can tailor the CV and make it speak to the person that's looking to hire that role, that's great. Now, what do I mean by that? If you have a job specification that you're reading, the job specification might say a lot of different points of what that person's looking for. What you could do is draw out that particular experience that the job specification is asking for. And as the hiring manager is then going through your CV, in their mind is going tick, 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 tick. Yes, this person looks like a great fit for the role. And that's because you've tailored your CV and made sure that it reads well. CVs, we look at them every day. I think the most key advice is make sure it sells you. And if you want CV advice, I'm more than happy to give people that. When it comes to how to sell yourself in an interview, preparation is key. Know your CV inside out. Know your experience. What do I mean by that? Well, you might be someone who's got 8 years experience. you've been around the block many times, you've got many different jobs, but if you don't know your own experience, so for instance, you might have had a role 5 years ago, can you remember the dates? Can you remember exactly what you did then? Make sure you know it, because there's nothing worse in an interview when someone's looking at a CV and there's lots of ums, ahs, oohs. You don't know what your background is. So know your CV inside out. When it comes to researching the interviewers, if you can find videos of them, find videos, watch videos. I'm a big fan of energy. How does that person come across? How are they feeling? What do I feel about them? Sometimes by getting them to talk, I'll actually come across in an interview much more rapport, because I've already got a sense of their personality. I'm not driving a car without a steering wheel. I've looked at that person. I've got an understanding of them. I understand how they come across. So that's really important. Research the interviewers, find out if there's any common ground. Did you go to the same university? Have you dealt with anything where there's some common threads? Because if you can build some rapport with that interviewer earlier on, the interview's going to be much smoother. Do remember, though, that an interview, it's a two-way street. It's as much about them getting to know you as it is you getting to know them. It's a misconception that an interview is a one-sided process here. These days, a candidate is interviewing the client, the law firm, the company, whatever it might be, just as much as it is the other way around. Job specs, always make sure that you know them inside out. Read through them. Don't ever get a lack of confidence if you don't hit every single point on a job specification. A lot of the time, a job specification is a wish list rather than a shopping list. There's going to be points which are negotiables. It's very, very rare that someone is going to look for every single point on a job spec to be fulfilled. The reason why is a lot of the time the magical dream candidate just doesn't exist, and firms are going to be a lot more open-minded. When we take job specs from clients all the time, we will always drill down and really get to understand what points are the negotiables, what points are non-negotiables, and what is it that they really need to see. Don't let a job spec put you off, but if you are lacking in a certain skill, it's better that you know that up front, and that's something that you can address, and even in the interview, you can then sell yourself against that spec. Be enthusiastic. Always let that energy come out. A lot of the time, I've had clients call me up over the years and have said to me, was that person actually excited about the role? Were they actually enthusiastic? Is it a role they're interested in? I would look and think, madness. How could you not know that person's interested in the job? Sometimes it's because the candidate is so busy on processing what's going on in the interview that they actually forget to tell the interviewer just how enthusiastic they are about the job. So if you're interested in the job, you're enthusiastic about the job, make sure you let the interviewer know. Let your personality come out. People buy on personality. I'll give you an example of a situation I had recently. I was working with a private equity firm in London. They came to me, they wanted an 8-year PQE corporate lawyer to work on some in-house matters. Great, but what they actually described to me was a certain personality. It was someone with a certain buzz, someone with a certain kind of personality that's going to fit into this buzzing environment where there's lots of fast-paced corporate deals. And I sent over a few candidates who'd actually done a very similar job before, but were really experienced. And then I sent over a wild card candidate, a candidate which I thought ticked every single box in terms of the personality, but they were lacking a lot in experience. I'd done a very well articulated email to the hiring manager about this person, my logic, my reasoning for sending them over. When I sent them over, I was really surprised that actually that was the candidate that they got in straight away, and that candidate ended up securing the role. So it's just an example that personality, people buy on it. Personality, there's more and more focus towards that in the kind of job selection process these days. Even things like psychometric testing, personality profiling, it's big business. And people really, I think, are getting to understand the value more and more on personality. So let your personality come out. It's important people see it. Even though an interview is a rabbit in headlights scenario, it's important that people, get to feel who you are. So try and relax. Take a deep breath before the interview. Yes, nerves sometimes come up. They can be, and I think we all get nervous at times, depending on the setting. But try and relax. A bit of adrenaline and a bit of nerves, I never think are personally a bad thing. But next of all, practice makes perfect with selling yourself. So make sure you speak with recruiters and experienced individuals who can give you some serious pointers. It might be that, you're someone that, hasn't got the best billings. Maybe you've had a rough couple of years with getting fees together. But, what you need to do is practice on how you're going to sell yourself against that. So it might be that, you're going to sell. But listen, I'm aware of what my billings are. I'm aware they're not great, but this is how I think. This is my commercial mindset. This is the things I think going to sell me anyway. This is what I think I can do in the right firm, and practice selling yourself. I think it's important, I think, to come across with those strong points, and the points that you really want to drill down in an interview is important. It might be that you just write down on a pad and paper a few top points that you take with you into the interview. Next of all, I just wanted to talk about, in an interview, if you ask questions, and I wanted to run through what are some of the common questions that we've had candidates tell us about over the years that they get asked that might be difficult. There's a way to answer these questions, and it's using the STAR, SATR, way of answering questions. I'll run through it first of all. So it's by going through these 4 different points: situation, task, action, result. And that's how you would explain and answer maybe a particularly tough interview question. Situation: set the stage for the story by sharing context around the situation or challenge you faced. Share any relevant details. For example, in my last role as lead designer, my team was short-staffed and faced significant backlogs of work. The account managers were setting unrealistic deadlines, which was causing stress for my team and affecting morale. I thought I'd keep this nice and easy and keep a situation which wasn't perhaps so legal focused. Secondly, after you've described the situation, you can move on to tasks. Describe your responsibility or role in the situation or challenge. For example, as a team leader, it was my role not only to ensure my team met our deadlines, but also to communicate bandwidth to other departments and keep my team motivated. 3 is action. Explain how you handled the situation or overcome the challenge. If the action was carried out by a team, focus on your efforts. For example, I set up a formal creative request process, including project timeline estimates to set better expectations. I set weekly meetings with account managers to discuss my team's bandwidth and share progress updates. 4, after you've gone through situation, task, action, 4 is result. What was the outcome you reached through your actions? If possible, quantify your success or provide concrete examples of the effects of your efforts. For example, by providing more transparency into my team's processes and setting better expectations with the account managers, we were able to reprioritize the designs team's to-do list and complete everything in our backlog. The following quarter, we were shortened our average project timeline by 2 days. I thought it would just be helpful to run through the STAR technique, because I think when you get asked difficult interview questions, being able to answer the questions quite concisely, quite neatly, give the situation, the task, and then giving actually what you contributed and the results is a nice and tidy way to answer these questions. I think as part of a preparation, always try and think of a couple examples in your mind, especially if you're a newly qualified solicitor or you're someone that's junior in your career. You're going to be much more likely to receive these kind of competency-based questions than someone that's perhaps much more senior in their career, where it's more about business strategy, growth kind of conversation. Some questions we thought would be helpful to list down is: what are your biggest strengths? This is a question which, if I had £1 for every time I heard this one, I'd be, in a very different situation. How do you handle feedback? What is your biggest accomplishments so far? What are you passionate about? This question comes up a lot, and I've heard this many, many times. How do you handle stressful work situations? What is your biggest weaknesses, and are you working on improving it? Why do you want to work at this law firm? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? How do you prioritize your work? What made you pursue a career in the legal field? Share an example of a time when you faced a difficult problem at work. How did you solve this problem? Describe a time when you were under a lot of pressure at work. How did you react? Particularly common question, especially when it comes to litigators, corporate lawyers, things like that. Being able to work under pressure is important, and firms are going to ask you questions in regards to that. Tell me about a mistake you've made. How did you handle it? Share an example of a time you had to make a difficult decision. What did you do? Again, you could use the STAR technique there. Situation, task, action, result. Use that technique to answer that question. Explain a situation where you use data or logic to make a recommendation. Tell me about a time when you disagreed with your boss. How did you resolve it? Never a particularly easy question, but again, the STAR technique is a great one to use there. Now, I hope all this information has been helpful. What I would say lastly on when interviewing and selling yourself as a candidate, another top tip, is look at the company, look at the law firm, and actually think, how is it that I can add value? Because when you go into these interview scenarios, where if you could be talking about value, ideas, things you've maybe seen in their news kind of storyline, or even if it's points about what are they doing as a business, how can you add value? Maybe go into an interview with suggestions. I've noticed this and I perhaps think this. If you can go in there as a kind of problem orientated solution type person that's going in there with suggestions, ideas, firms love that, and I think companies love that. And I've interviewed people for my own business, and when you get someone that comes across in that way, I think it's really, really refreshing. So I think that's all my advice on how to sell yourself as a candidate, and I've crammed it as much as I possibly can do in these last 35 minutes. So I hope it's been helpful. But if you are a candidate that's coming onto the market or want some specific advice, my team and me at JMC are all even more delighted to offer you that help. Do get in contact with us. The website address is www.jmc-legal.com, or you can email me at jason@jmc-legal.com. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks so much to the Law Society for providing me this platform to give this advice, and I hope to speak to you soon.